Well, anyway, Mike, the one of the questions I have for you is, you've been around this industry for a while. What are the typical issues you see with the capital equipment procurement process? Since we're recording this as we're about to jump into a new year, maybe start by painting a picture of what a typical capital budgeting and allocation process looks like.
So the vast majority of equipment that's purchased in the segment of the manufacturing industry that we support is purchased as a capital asset. What this
Mm-hmm.
implies is you need to do a lot of due diligence to vet your suppliers, to verify that the equipment is what you need it to be, and ultimately you're using the milestone-based capital procurement process that's been around since the original industrial revolution to manage the risk of the transfer of that asset from the organization that designed and built it to the organization that intends to operate it for profit. And of course, it's always been more complicated than that because to get the return on the investment, not only do you need to get the asset, but that asset needs to perform. Its service costs need to be reasonable. You need the team that's able to achieve the performance levels. So there's a myriad different complexities in that whole process, which today, the best companies in the world invest heavily to try and do as much diligence on their suppliers as possible. And that comes at a cost, and it's often a cost that's a hidden cost. It's not contained in the capital cost of the asset. It's a cost both in the resources required to do that diligence, to give you as much confidence that it's going to achieve the results that you targeted for, but it's also a cost because you're taking the risk. And anybody that's been around this industry for long enough realizes not all these things turn out to achieve the performance levels that they were designed for. And so we think there's a better way, a more flexible way, instead of a one-size-fits-all capital procurement process, to leverage the industrial Internet of Things or Industry 4.0 technology, however you want to call it, that is really resident on all these machines today, to use that data, that performance data, to structure agreements and purchasing processes that ensure that the parties that are supplying the machines and the parties that are operating the machines have alignment in their interests, so that everybody succeeds together when the machine achieves what it's targeted for. And that's a very different and new concept versus kind of the transfer of the asset over the course of a very short time period on the front end of your investment.
Yeah, so I mean, I heard a couple things there. One of the first things that jumps out about that is how you say it hasn't really evolved since the first industrial revolution. I mean, we're talking centuries here at this point. You mentioned how another issue that comes up is how things don't always perform as promised as a result. There are a lot of promises made when it comes to saying this piece of equipment is going to, do X for quality, X for throughput. And I think one of the biggest things you said is there's not necessarily a way to hold people accountable after that transaction is done. At the end of the day, it starts to fall on the end user at that point, and there are more connected technologies that can enable people to have that ongoing relationship now.
Yeah, and I'd say the best OEMs in the market today, they understand, and they've historically understood that commitment to their customers' success is key to their business. Right, the best OEMs in the market don't let their customers fail. When you work with somebody like Pearson Packaging, right, who builds extraordinary secondary packaging equipment, right? They're the type of organization with a reputation of, sticking with your customer until they're happy. The challenge in today's market, though, is that comes at a cost. There's a premium to that, right? And it often when some of the best OEMs go to market with their technology, right, it's baked into the upfront capital cost of the equipment. To have that kind of support and working with an organization that has that reputation and has the service department and all the different resources available to ensure that they can help their customer. But then they get compared in the market against a machine builder that may not have the same approach, that may not have the same bench strength in terms of their ability to support the machinery that they're supplying. And so you're really comparing apples to oranges when you're just looking at the upfront cost of the machine, which unfortunately is probably the easiest thing to base a decision on, is which one costs more They both tell me they can run 100 units a minute, or everybody says that they're going to achieve these uptime rates. But it's not the promise that matters. It's the actual ability to deliver. And so what we see are some of the best OEMs in their respective markets saying, not only are we able to make a commitment to you that we can achieve your performance levels, but we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and stand behind that, because you're paying for the asset as we achieve those operating requirements. And that's a very different concept, and a concept that I think the strongest OEMs in the market are really going to gravitate towards, because it recognizes the total cost of ownership of investing in industrial automation, not just the upfront machinery sale, where you can sell a machine for any price you want. The question is it going to be a good value for that end user?
Well, I think the thing that hit me most with that is the best OEMs are having to front load their price, with all the other good things they offer that help out the customer. But when you're comparing it during the capital process, they could lose because their price appears higher, even though they are offering the more they're going to guarantee more as
Yeah,
it
I mean,
goes
Chris,
along.
you're a former salesperson, right? For Rockwell Automation, a company that I spent many years of my career with as well. And I think Rockwell, in a lot of ways, is no different than most companies now in this market who are really selling the concept of total cost of ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yes, we may cost more, but let me tell you and itemize all the different ways that our technology, our machine, our whatever it may be, creates value for the end user, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're trying to create that value proposition and justify the sale price, right? But at the end of the day, what you bill them for? You bill them for the thing you sold them. You bill them for the machine. You bill them for the technology. I gave you a machine. You gave me money, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not billing them for the result of achieving the promise that you made,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, there's very little recourse if it doesn't achieve the promise, right? Like I said earlier, the best machinery manufacturers, of course, stand behind their equipment,
Mm-hmm.
right? But often that's to their disadvantage in the sales process, and end users sometimes are attracted by somebody that may quote a specification that's outside their ability to firmly commit to, right? Because it helps them close the sale, or they're willing to lower their price, even though it means cutting corners on the quality of that machine and some of the things that contribute to its long-term return on investment. Because I can shave a few pennies now, and they're not really going to run into problems until 5 years down the road when it's out of warranty, or 3 years down the road, or quite frankly, in this market, 1 year down the road when
Mm-hmm.
it's outside of warranty, right? And so it's been it's an interesting thing when you start changing the dynamic from selling a capital asset where you're promising total cost of ownership but billing them for the transfer of the asset,
Mm-hmm.
to billing them based on the total cost of ownership, on the value proposition, the ability to achieve an outcome, right? And of course, with SteamChain, there's lots of ways to do that. There's many different KPIs that our clients use to structure agreements that create a value proposition that's very tangible for their end users, right? What I'm paying for is number of units produced, the amount of uptime and availability that I have on the machine. I'm getting a discount when there's quality issues, right? Et cetera, et cetera. You can start to really tie that to how the customer thinks about their production machinery, and structure it so that there's a shared interest in the performance over time. And we think that's a powerful sales tool. We think that's a powerful value
Mm-hmm.
proposition, because you're really using technology to sell what you're promising,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to promising something but delivering something that you hope achieves the promise.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you phrase it, using technology to sell what you're promising. And we're having a great discussion so far. I feel like we're hitting a number of the challenges within the capital procurement process, as well as some of the opportunities for the future. So let's put a bow around both of these. Let's start with Mike. How would you summarize, what would you, if you, kind of going back on our conversation, what are the top 3 challenges you see for end users when it comes to procuring capital equipment?
Chris, I think there's a number of challenges that, and it's part and parcel of what you're buying today. And number one is it takes a lot of time to truly vet a supplier, to and create that relationship so you know how they're going to perform. So if I was buying a new piece of production equipment today and I didn't have any relationships and I didn't know anything about, but I knew I needed this production tool, right? Um, it Finding the people that supply that technology, evaluating those corporations, not just looking at the cut sheet on the machine itself to say, which one runs the fastest for the least amount of dollars, but which one has a great service department, so that I know if I do have a downtime event, it's going to be a short downtime event and not a downtime event that costs me, days or weeks of lost production, right? It's built with technology that I can find people to support, right? There's a million variables. It interfaces well to the rest of my production environment, so I can manage and create visibility to how it's performing and resolve problems quickly. It's got world-class components on it that I'm confident I can source through the OEM, and that they'll be able to have supply for an extended life cycle, so that 2 years from now, if a component fails, that we don't have to redesign the machine or somehow monkey wrench a new device in there because the one that was original equipment is no longer available, right? And so when you look at all these different things that an end user should reasonably be doing to vet a supplier, it's a lot of work, right? You're never going to catch them all, right? It's very hard to do an apples to apples comparison between suppliers and to really look at that total cost of ownership and say supplier A is going to be better on a per unit basis than supplier B. It's very difficult to get to that number. But when the supplier themselves is providing the implicit guarantee of the performance of the asset through a machine as a service contract, and they're charging you per unit, per minute of availability or uptime, right? It's very easy to get to that number and a direct comparison. So even if maybe you choose a supplier that isn't able to keep it running, you're automatically paying less for it and in effect getting the discount because it's not achieving the same results that you purchased it on. And we think that's a very powerful concept that helps end users specifically move more rapidly with their automation choices, right? To compare apples to apples because they start to operationalize the cost of their production tools, right? In a way that really allows the OEM to take a broader scope of supply because they're beginning to provide the services and support necessary to achieve your to help you achieve your production goals. And that's what they're being paid for, not just the machine. And so we think that really changes the game, allows people to move faster in terms of their investment in automation technology. Mm-hmm. And for the right end user customers, we think it's a critical thing, especially now with so much interest and demand for replacing the humans that were doing some of these tasks previously, when that's becoming more and more difficult and more of a risk to people's businesses.
It's what I like about that answer is you start with all the reasons why it takes time to vet a supplier. And as you get down to it, it kind of leads to exactly where we started, where at the end of the day, the way transactions are set up today in a capital procurement process, it's not tied to performance. And that strikes me as still being the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity, where people do have the technology now where they can purchase equipment where it's tied into performance with what SteamChain is doing.
And it's not just technology. I mean, there's suppliers in the market that are providing their machines on the basis of machine as a service contracts, sometimes with upfront payments, sometimes purely on an operational expense. And so there's a financial component to it as well, just to make the whole capital budgeting and capital management process easier for the finance folks and the business leadership of an organization that has a desire to automate. So it really clicks a lot of boxes for folks. And ultimately, though, I'm a technologist, right? uh, I'm an automation guy at heart, and what I see is it just makes it easier to confidently invest in advanced complicated, I'll say in quotes, right? Some people find it complicated to absorb automation, certainly complicated to purchase it because you're trying to vet all these different concepts and ideas from all these different suppliers, and you know who do you really trust?
Mm-hmm.
And this has been a reputation based industry for a very long time. You work with the people that you've always worked with because you know what they deliver. You buy the same machines because doing something different represents risk that you're taking on in your organization, right? And ultimately that slows down progress. That slows down organizations' ability to automate and to advance technology within their operation because they're focused too much on the risk because that risk lands on their shoulders. And the best way to manage that is to collaborate with your supplier so that there's shared accountability, right, on those risk elements so that both businesses will suffer when the machines are not achieving the production goals that were set forth between the parties. Um,
Sharing.
and, the, and the best OEMs in the world are, we see a move towards this concept of machine as a service because we think it really highlights
Mm-hmm.
the value that those organizations create as a partner to the end users that are operating this equipment.
Well, and that's one of the things that excited me about machine as a service from the get-go was how it shares that risk and accelerates those partnerships, strengthens those partnerships because at the end of the day you're on the same team based on the way that transaction is done. As we wrap up,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. As we wrap up, Mike, one question I do have to kind of put a bow around it, and you've talked to a lot of these topics. We've covered a lot of the challenges around the traditional process and how SteamChain and machine as a service can help. So we promised in this video that we'd talk about how to get the most out of your CapEx budget. What are 3 tips or so that you'd offer for getting the most out of your CapEx budget in 2021 and beyond?
Look, as you're looking to make capital acquisitions for your operation, number one is I'd encourage you to ask your OEMs about working together on a variable payment program, an outcome-based payment program, so that instead of risking all your capital upfront at the time of delivery of the machine, that there's progress payments based on provable results of the equipment where you're confident. And whether you use SteamChain for that to automate the process, to link it directly in an objective way to the achievement of those goals, or you come up with another way to do that. The more you can work with your OEMs to design those programs, I think the better. The more you focus on OEMs that understand the value that they can help create by leveraging their services organization, making sure that they have the bench strength that if something does go wrong, they're confident they can support you. Especially now when, even there's so much going on in the world with COVID and everything else, but the big macro trend lines still show that demographically, the skilled labor gap is going to continue to be one of the biggest headwinds to productivity in manufacturing operations. And it just argues for making sure you're working with OEMs that have the ability, the capacity to support you, to provide you with variable terms that really focus on partnership and their ability to help you achieve the outcome.
Love that. And there was one other that was jumping into my mind. I mean, here's the thing when I think about CapEx as well. A lot of these companies are probably having to pick 1 or 2 of their best projects out of, a set of 5 or 6 good projects that would all use productivity. I mean, would you say there's even a step before this just to kind of evaluate, if you could, how many projects would you realistically do if you had the ability and you weren't limited by capital?
Yeah, and I think that's spot on, Chris. I mean, what I've seen over the years is that when it comes to evaluating investment decisions for organizations, right? People look at it as a internal cost of capital argument, right? So I need to validate that I'm getting internal rate of return of 17% or 18%. And they set those numbers, right, to say anything over that line could qualify for a capital investment. And then we're going to rack and stack them, right, because we only have a fixed amount of capital. And so only the ones with the biggest numbers, right, in terms of potential return are going to be invested in. And the problem with that is twofold. Number one, you end up getting a lot of overly rosy estimates of the return on investment of these programs because everybody realizes they're in competition for a limited capital budget, right? And that means the reliability of those forecasts sometimes is questionable because people want their programs to get off the ground. It also means that there's very good programs that could contribute to your financial performance that don't get invested in, even if they're less risky because they don't have such a large ROI. But that number in itself doesn't contain all the elements of risk and everything else. Now compare and contrast that with fundamentally kind of shifting it from a capital budget to an operating budget, where you're saying, hey, I can add a penny per case of product produced. Right. And what I know is that, I don't have to worry about end of line packaging anymore at all because, for the price of 1 penny as an operating expense, which I can easily absorb in my product cost with no upfront capital, I can kind of eliminate all that. And even if they run into problems, then I'm not paying the penny. Obviously, it's impacting my business. It's also impacting the OEM's business. And they have they have a built-in motivation to help me solve my problem versus I gave them $500,000 and I can't get them on the phone, in which case all my problem, right? And you'd much rather have your OEM feeling the pain alongside you when there's pain to be felt. And so you're both getting better, more advanced automation faster from suppliers that are willing to stand behind it and put their money where their mouth is on an operating expense that you're paying for when production is achieved. And I think that's a powerful idea for anybody looking to, automate their end of line packaging or really any other industrial process that they're looking to consider to upgrade here in 2021.
Well, one of the things I keep hearing from these answers, and this is great, it's not just the benefit that occurs in the procurement process, it's all the things that happen after that when you have that shared accountability with your OEM partners. So as we wrap up, Mike, what would you say the call to action is at the end of this little video?
Look, I just want to wish everybody a happy and productive 2021. For those folks out there that are watching this because they're responsible for getting the production equipment that their organizations require to have a financially successful year, I'd encourage you guys to look at machine as a service as an alternative option that may create more value for you in the long run and allow you to move quicker towards your goals of automating your production facilities.
Love that. And as always, you can get all the information you want on Machine as a Service by heading over to steamchain.io. Mike, thanks for taking the time for this conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.